Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Centre for London's webinar on lighting in London. Thank you so much for joining us all today. Really glad to have you here to talk about our newest report, looking at how London uses electric lighting in public spaces and how we can improve our city's great indoors with it. We're so very pleased to have you all with us. I know it's the evening. I know you have many other things to do, so thank you for choosing to be here. My name is Claire Harding and I'm the Research Director here at Centre for London. I'll be your chair today. I have chosen the worst possible webinar to be chairing, to have the most ridiculous webinar problems, and I am a living embodiment of why it's really important to get lighting right. So apologies for looking like a prog rock cover. It was not my intention. Please look at the other panellists instead. Just a few words before we start on Centre for London and why we're holding this event. We're the capital's dedicated think tank. I'm sure many of you know us already. We develop new solutions to London's critical challenges, and we advocate for a fair, sustainable and prosperous global city. We publish research, state events just like this one, hopefully later in the year. Some of them will be in person as well, convene and influence. And in this, which is our most recent project, we're really trying to make the case for reassessing how London is lit and how we can use this to make the city more walkable, inviting and enjoyable for everyone. The City of London's lighting strategy, as Nico will say later, published this year, is the last year is the first ever to have been written by a London borough, and last year the London Nighttime Commission published a report, and Illuminated River began to light up London's bridges. So we're really seeing a move towards more focus on lighting in our city, but there's much more that can be done. And we set out to explore questions about sustainability, about equity, about making our public spaces fair and usable for everybody, about well-being, and about making recommendations for a new approach to lighting in our wonderful city. And I think coronavirus has only shown how important that is, as all of us are spending more time outside and more time in our own local areas. Before we move on with this webinar, I'd like to thank the sponsors of the project, so our funders, the Illuminated River Foundation, the Greater London Authority and the Rothschild Foundation, and our supporting sponsors, City of London Corporation and Cross River Partnerships. Thank you very much to you all. And now I'd like to introduce Nico Bosetti, who's my colleague here at Centre for London, our research manager, who's going to present the findings and the recommendations of this report. Thank you so much, Nico.
Thank you very much, Claire. I hope you can all see now my slide. So I would like to start with some thank yous. The first one goes to my colleague Joe Wills for his very impressive ability to summarize absolute mountains of studies, as well as local authority budget documents. Thank you very much, Joe. We are also incredibly grateful to our advisory group for their advice and their comments on the research, and of course our funders for making this project possible. Lighting is a vast topic, and our ambition is as modest as trying to make London one of the best lit cities in the world. It became quickly obvious that one of the ways of making that happen was to stimulate public debate about how London is currently lit, and I hope the report and today's event will help with this. So we, as part of the research, did an extensive literature review, as well as interviewed with 15 practitioners in local authorities, business improvement districts, community groups representatives, and lighting designers, both in London and in other cities, as well as analysis of investments into lighting upgrades. Our starting point in the report is to show how much of an asset good lighting is to cities, because it makes it more enjoyable to spend time outdoors, which is quite a policy objective at the moment. But also that brings an economic boost. It's no surprise that we put up decorations specifically on high streets in winter. It also enables us to be more active. Just to take one example, if a playground isn't lit, which seems to be the case for many playgrounds in London, then play effectively stops at sunset, which is in mid-afternoon in winter. And then being outside means we're also more likely to bump into people, stop for a chat, and all these things can have indirect health benefits. Good lighting also reinforces feelings of attachment by making the city more beautiful and more striking, for example, through public art. Well-considered lighting can make us want to return to places, and that will be crucial as we seek to boost international tourism again. But what does good lighting actually look like? The answer is very much that it depends on context. Lighting designers say that it's about having the right amount of light in the right place and at the right time. The pictures that you see here show the process of renovation of a public space in Shadwell Estate. And you can see here that good lighting meant lighting the right places, the playground and the seating areas, as well as some vertical illumination of the entrance hall, highlighting the way in and out, and as well as dimming some of the outdoor corridor lights, which were redundant and right up against residents' windows. There is no blinding glare or high contrast between light and dark, which is so typical of flood lighting. On top of this, new LED technologies and central management systems and sensors allow us to go much further than this and tailor lighting based on time or use. What happens when we get lighting wrong? It makes our public spaces more exclusive. Overall, 1 in 5 Londoners say that they do not feel safe at night, and that proportion is higher among younger and older people, low-income households, women, and people with a disability. We'd expect the gap to be actually wider if one asks about specific places which people go to or don't go to at night. And that's because poor lighting contributes to feelings of insecurity. It makes places harder to navigate, whether it's about finding your way or safety from trip hazards and vehicles. Glare and contrast also make it more difficult to read people. So it's really important to make people feel safe and make people be safe. And then for lighting, that means it creates lower quality working environments for the 1.6 million Londoners who work at night. Also is an energy wastage, and we end up with higher levels of light pollution. That's part of it is sky glow, that's the yellowish glow that prevents us from seeing the night sky, as well as light trespass onto natural spaces, which we know impacts on biodiversity. And then we're also missing out on economic and well-being opportunities I've highlighted earlier. So how is London doing? Because the first question is, are we lighting the right places? We do have some beautiful lit streets, but most lighting has been designed to help vehicle traffic rather than pedestrians. Light trespass is also commonly affecting residents. On the other hand, places like playgrounds or heritage buildings are often not lit at all. Are we using the right amount of light? The honest answer to that question is that we don't know for sure because we don't really carry out surveys of luminance. One notable exception is this image of the Thames luminance surveys that were commissioned as part of the Illuminated River project, the first luminance survey commissioned in London. And on the image, you can see red colors showing emitted lights over recommended levels. We did find that the quality of lighting very much depends on where you live. For instance, it's more common to have poor lighting schemes installed on housing estates, where harsh and forbidding lighting have been used as a way of increasing feelings of safety, but may have had the opposite effect by kind of keeping residents out of common areas. Are we lighting at the right time? We know that nighttime light coverage is increasing in the UK by about 3% every year. That's not a good thing. New systems do allow dimming at certain hours of the night, but we don't seem to be making much use of them in London. There's one positive, which is that most local authorities in London either have or are upgrading streetlights to LED, cutting energy use by about half and costs as well. So what is holding us back? I think we come back to about 4 gaps. The first one is a gap in strategy. 2 out of 33 boroughs only have lighting strategy, which you do need to guide lighting investments. So it helps respond to the city's pressing challenges, and as well as regulating lighting from private sources. The government's manual for streets, which we use for guiding street design, is outdated, and the London plan sets an aspiration, but is not specific about lighting. We also have a management gap in that we need more coordination between lighting schemes so that they complement each other rather than creating unnecessary light pollution. We were told that...
Nico, so sorry to interrupt your presentation, it's great. We're getting a bit of interference from your microphone. I wonder if you could just hold it slightly away from your clothes. Thank you, and apologies to people if that's made it hard for you to hear Nico's presentation.
Okay, sorry. I'll just speak like this if that's okay. We're also told that enforcement of planning approvals is patchy. We didn't have an engagement gap, which is that there is no public engagement on street lighting changes, and within the development process, lighting designers are often engaged late, if at all, limiting what can be done. And finally, some of these challenges take root in a lack of priority given to lighting and a lack of resource that not all do. So how do we address these 4 gaps? We're calling on boroughs to introduce lighting strategies to guide the next round of investment, as well as coordinating and regulating lighting from private sources. We're also calling on the Mayor of London to introduce a framework for boroughs to build on where developing their own lighting strategies, including, for instance, who they should be engaging and desirable outcomes, as well as some planning guidance setting out how light should be treated in new developments and public realm improvements. We are calling also on developers to base their lighting interventions on what is needed locally and learn this through public participation, as well as engage lighting designers as early as possible in the design process. And finally, look at that design review panels consider lighting plans when they're assessing development projects. We were told it's often not the case. In terms of management, we'd like BID to take more responsibility in coordinating lighting across public and private sectors. In residential areas, this could be done by community groups. This will need to come with some resource, both in terms of knowledge and money. So we're recommending that the Mayor introduces a lighting resources hub, and that organizations like Urban Design London or the NLA start running educational programs on lighting for built environment professionals. Some other resource for resident groups could be found from developer contribution and heritage funds. One of them is the Heritage Action Zones funding, which could cover sensitive lighting schemes as part of high street regeneration. It's also obvious, but some savings can be achieved by taking a more strategic view. For example, the City of London's lighting strategy enabled a 20% cut in the number of lighting fixtures and a 50% cut in energy consumption. We've also created a toolkit of good lighting, because changing the process will definitely change the outcome here. I'll just highlight a couple of points from it. First one is obvious, but its purpose. The starting point of any lighting installation should be defining who the users are and what they will be using the light for. The second one is participation. I've said it's currently not done enough. The current and potential users of lighting should be involved in its design, and that's the only way of making that this lighting scheme works for all. And finally, restraint, which is not something I was familiar with when I started this project, but brighter lighting is not necessarily better when you're lighting a building or helping people see at night, and often a good results can be achieved by dimming the lights, which was done here on London Bridge. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nico. That was a brilliant presentation, and apologies for the interference that we got early on in that. If there's anything you didn't catch, please let us know and we'll try to point you towards it. In terms of the format for the rest of this event, our panelists are going to share their responses to the research. We'll get a bit of a discussion going and we'll take questions from the audience. We have an absolutely amazing panel today. I'm so delighted that you are all able to join us. And if I read aloud all of your biographies, we'd literally be talking about all the interesting things that all of you have done. We'd probably be here until the end of the webinar. So please forgive me for condensing the very interesting information about you all. Really pleased to be joined by Amy Lamé, who's the Night Czar at the Greater London Authority. Also, as many of you will know, the co-founder of both Ducky and RVT Future, which has been a voluntary LGBT plus community group campaigning to preserve the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, which I'm sure many of you will know about. She was the mayoress of Camden in 2010-11 and talked a lot during that time about culture and live music and nightlife. She's a familiar presence on TV, print and radio. If you don't already listen to her Six Music show on a Sunday afternoon, you should. And her debut book, From Prejudice to Pride, A History of the LGBT plus movement, came out in 2017. Also very pleased to be joined by Gabriella Gómez-Mont, joining us today from Spain, who is the founder and principal of Experimentalista, and also the former chief creative officer. That is such a cool job title. More cities should have chief creative officers of Mexico City, and the founder of some really interesting work there, which I'm sure she'll be able to tell us about. And Experimentalista is a new type of nomadic and creative office specialised in cities that constantly shifts shape to accommodate high-level transdisciplinary collaborations across the world. Really interesting stuff. We're also joined by Sarah Gaventa, who's the director of the Illuminated River Foundation, which Nico alluded to in his presentation, public space and public art expert and curator, and previously the government's advisor on public space as the director of Cave Spaces at the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, also a co-founder of Scarlet Projects, a creative consultancy for curated architecture and design exhibitions, events and public spaces. Again, lots of really, really interesting experience that's relevant to this work. And last, but by no means at all least, Nick Bodger, who's the Cultural and Visitor Development Director of the City of London Corporation. We've already talked about the City of London's work on light, and Nick leads on all aspects of the City of London's cultural and visitor strategies and represents its collective cultural and tourism offers at a London, local and national level. So a very interesting and important job, especially now. In terms of audience, thank you very much all for being here. You can ask questions in the Q&A, please do. That way we know what you want to know from the panelists. And you'll see in the Q&A function, I'm sure you've all done this millions and millions of times, so you know this already. Please upvote other people's questions if you want to get them answered rather than asking a similar one. That helps us to make sure we're answering the things that are really important. If you're watching this on YouTube and you can't see the Zoom chat, please add your questions using the hashtag on Twitter and we'll make sure that those get fed into the Q&A as well. Please do use the chat to talk to other attendees, share resources and so on. But if there's something that you want the panelists to see, please put it in the Q&A because that way we'll be sure that I'll see it. Thank you. So I'd like to start by inviting Amy to give her reflections on the report. And in particular, Amy, as the Night Czar, you get to hear from organisations who operate at night and really crucially from the workers in those organisations. So interested in what they're saying about London's lighting and also particularly interested in your and the Mayor's thinking on what improvements London needs to make to lighting, particularly at night. Thank you, Amy.
Great. Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you, Nick, for the presentation. It's great to be here with you today to launch this groundbreaking report alongside so many esteemed colleagues, collaborators, and friends. And I think you've hit on something there, Claire, that the nighttime is a time of opportunity when we can reimagine our high streets and our neighborhoods. The look and the sound of the high street can make the difference between a space that people feel comfortable using and a space that excludes people. And in my role as Night Czar, I've had the privilege of visiting every part of our city to understand the challenges that are faced after dark. And everywhere I travel, the issue of lighting is brought up. The street has too much light, the street doesn't have enough light, it's got the wrong kind of light. It's something of great concern to people in every corner of our capital. And the way that we light our streets can impact on our lives in so many ways. And what's interesting is that while the London Lighting Report is absolutely groundbreaking, this is not a new conversation. So I want to take you back 2 centuries, actually for nearly 2 centuries. The Vauxhall Pleasure Garden was known as a place for amusement and diversion. And it existed just south of the Thames. It sat on the green space behind where there is now a railway line, just alongside one of the city's busiest traffic and transport hubs. And it may not be apparent now, but Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens was famous for creating a fairy tale-like atmosphere by the huge number of lights and for the dramatic effect produced when these lamps were lit at dusk. So back in 1741, there were 1,000 lamps, and these could be lit using a system of linked fuses in about 2 minutes. Now, this had never been seen before. And apparently, the lamp oil that was made of whale or sea blubber gave the gardens quite a distinctive smell as well. But by the end of the 1770s, the number of lights had more than doubled because they were so popular. By 1822, there were in excess of 20,000 lamps being lit every night in Vauxhall, and people will come from all over. There were globe lamps on trees, lampposts from the ceilings of supper boxes with smaller lamps attached to arches and obelisks. Now, originally, these lamps were uncolored, but then colored ones, mostly blue lamps, were introduced from 1786. And then lamps of all colors were used from around 1806. And we can only imagine now the delight and wonder on the faces of 18th and 19th century Londoners and visitors who experienced this incredible lighting up of the night. Now, it all sounds lovely, doesn't it? But crucially, these lights enabled the expansion of the Pleasure Gardens enterprise, allowing tens of thousands of Londoners, from royalty to rogues, to visit the gardens at night, enjoy a meal, have a stroll with their friends, take in a performance, sip a glass of beer. It was also a huge employer and economic driver for the capital, attracting domestic and international tourism. So light, in all its many forms, from decorative to utilitarian, enabled the development of our modern entertainment and leisure culture, and indeed is a huge boost to our economy even today. So for too long, I think we've had too little planning, too little research, and too little strategy for lighting London at night. So perhaps we may need to not only look to the future with this Lighting London report, but also back to the 1700s, where decisions about lighting were having a real impact on the local economy, on tourism, on cultural activity. And like Centre for London, the Mayor and I are firm believers in the power of collaboration. And I guess my challenge to everyone today who lights London is to join forces and to work in partnership. And this includes government and developers, designers and planners. Lighting really gives us a unique opportunity to create places where we all feel welcome and included after dark. So let's harness that force and put people, the users of light, at the heart of our nighttime planning. And I really look forward to continuing our work together and carrying on with this truly illuminating conversation. I couldn't resist a little pun at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was fab. We had so much fun coming up with titles for this report. The one we came up with was really one of the least pun-related ones. Really interesting stuff on the history there. It's not as cool as what you just shared, but for those who are interested in a brief history of lighting in London, there is a little bit of that in our report as well. But yeah, I think Amy's story was better, so maybe just use that. I'd like to come to Sarah next. Sarah, it'd be great to hear more from you about the Illuminated River project, how it came about, and crucially, what that's revealed for us about the way that London uses and governs lighting. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you. And thank you, Amy. Bring back the Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens. That's what I say. We're all desperate. We all need pleasure. So I've been working on this project, which has got the wrong title because we are not illuminating the river. We're actually taking light off the river. We should be called Illuminated Bridges, but they'd already done, I'm afraid, the corporate identity when I arrived, because actually it's all about what we've been learning. It's about light in the right place, illuminating what you need to illuminate, but respecting the dark as well. And certainly the river. I mean, the Thamesis means dark river, and so it's been incredibly important to us to actually allow it to be dark and to look at that respect that we should have for light and dark in our cityscape. So, I mean, I suppose I came to this my journey towards the light, if you want to call it that. I'm sorry, 4.5 years of puns, and they don't get any better. Started with learning as much as I possibly could, because I wasn't an expert on this. And the more I learned, the more I was surprised, that about the color temperature, the difference between just what a warm light will do as opposed to a sort of a blue-white light. Light spill, the impact of direct versus reflected light, which has huge impact on our environment, especially our wildlife. What Lighting Kit can do now is absolutely extraordinary, and yet there's so LEDs, the smart lighting that is possible versus some of the sort of historic things that we've used in the past, like metal halides. I mean, when we were talking to the bridge owners about the permissions for how long the lights could be left on for, they said, well, they go on half an hour before sunset and go off half an hour before dawn. And I said, why do they go on half an hour before sunset? Well, it takes 30 minutes for the metal halides to warm up. So we were like, well, we don't need to do that. And we also talked about, even though they had permissions for the previous lighting schemes on the bridges to stay on to dawn, they were set in the 1970s. And we said, well, let's turn them off at 2. Let's keep the city dark in areas where there isn't an awful lot of cultural activity. And create a moment of reflection and darkness, and bringing that back as well. We learned a lot about the sort of psychology of light. We all know it affects us, and it does in many different ways. So there was a huge amount that we had to learn before we started about how do we create a light art piece across a river on grade 1 and 2 listed structures. The next thing we did was consulted and listened to community groups, many of whom we were really surprised to hear were dealing with a lot of lighting issues themselves. I mean, one community group near Tower Bridge told us 2/3 of the things that they were fighting, and we always find community groups are fighting something, were light related. And it was about overlit office buildings and the negative impact that light had on them. A lot of them also wanted to be in more control of it. They felt like they didn't have a voice, that they weren't able to change anything. And so we worked with a lot of community groups about how they could be enabled to be able to sort of do something like that. I mean, one of the things we've developed actually as a result of this project is amenity lighting for the booksellers under Waterloo Bridge, which is owned by BFI, and we've created a smart app so that the booksellers can turn it up high when they're working and selling their lovely books. And then when they've gone, the BFI can turn it back down low. So there's this idea that we have technology out there that can help us create a lighting nightscape that works for different users at different times. So that's been really fascinating. It's not actually very hard. It's, we're a unique organization, I suppose, because all we're thinking about is light for 4 years. So yeah, so that's all I can think about, I'm afraid. So the overlit office buildings was something that we really were surprised about. We took people on night walks and we looked at how inconsistent the lighting treatment is in different areas. Some places are very brightly lit, and we talked about and dark, and it can be almost immediate. And the fact that you're more likely to be mugged in a brightly lit area because you've just come out of the dark and on a bit of like a rabbit in headlights, that's not something I think that people really understand. We were also surprised at how much our historic environment disappears at night. Where we're working, there are 2 World Heritage sites. So the Tower of London has a wonderful lighting strategy where it lights the tower walls very low and focuses on the White Tower. But Tower Bridge doesn't bear that in mind in terms of its own lighting strategy. So it's very interesting about the lack of conversations, and that's no fault of anyone. We're an organisation that has actually been a catalyst for joining up some of those conversations, and we realise that people aren't sharing what their own strategies are and best practice, and that's one of the things we want to see. So our historic environment disappears at night, and the cityscape becomes something else, and it's mainly what facilities managers want us to see. Very brightly lit offices. I asked one who's in charge of the really fabulous Terry Farrell building, which is above Charing Cross Station, which looks like a Wurlitzer. I said, why are you so brightly lit at night? Because you're well over the recommended limits. And he said it's to compete with the South Bank. Their office is Price Waterhouse and Cooper. And unless Amy is planning on doing some DJing there soon, I wouldn't say it's a major cultural attraction at night. So it's very interesting how different buildings compete, and yet it's not about an offer at night. It's not about curating the nightscape so that we know where to go and play, which is what we also would like to do. But there aren't any villains in this, because when we explained to him that his building was well over the legal recommended limits, because I think this legal and recommended is very interesting, he was very happy to sort of reconsider that. But everyone is proud of what their own buildings, and therefore that is reflected in the way they want to see theirs to be the brightest and the best. So we commissioned the first ever luminance study along the Thames banks, and we did that primarily to look at the bridges and see how much light pollution from the current lighting schemes were going into the river, and also sort of lighting lampposts and things like that. But what we learned was actually it was the buildings that were the biggest pollutants. And the walkie-talkie actually turned out to be the worst of all, which frankly is one I wouldn't mind seeing turned off at night. And so that made us think, well, how can we share this information? Because we've got all this data. And as Claire said, I used to work at CABE, and you can take the girl out of CABE, but not CABE out of the girl. And I think using best practice, sharing all the data that we have and knowledge, can only help people make more informed decisions about what they do. The two bridges we did find that well over the recommended limits were London Bridge, and just by creating special baffles and changing the lighting, we will manage to keep the light on the bridge. And I think that's another thing, is about light where it needs to be and not spilling. And this light pollution and light spill is very easy to do if you don't take the time to do it properly. And that's why we need lighting professionals involved from day one to make sure, not trying to fix things after they're already a problem. And the other bridge, which is much loved, is Albert Bridge, which throws out as much light as a motorway. If that was replaced with LED lights, you would get the same beautiful effect with 50% electricity saved and without this light pollution. And as I said, there aren't any villains. So how do we help people? And that's what this report is about. And so we found that we were helping community groups look at what they could do. So Illuminated Rotherhithe, which is in the report as a case study, we offered advice to them. And for Southwark Cathedral, which is an incredible and important landmark, the Dean was so frustrated that it had no presence at night. So we created a pro bono white gentle lighting scheme, because also the way you use light to I suppose that the way that we've used it also with Illuminated River is to reveal the architecture. It isn't a light show. I think we don't need lots of light shows at night. I think what we're looking at is how we use the qualities of light to reveal the best of our city that we want to enjoy. So it seems to us that curation of the night and this best practice and knowledge sharing is so important. And that's why we approached Centre for London. I'm so happy to be joined by all our fantastic partners, City of London and the GLA and Cross River Partnership, to start a conversation. I don't think the report has all the answers, as Nico would have said, but it's about joining things up. And there's an awful lot of expertise out there, LSE, for example, Don Slater. But I think we're all maybe a little bit siloed, and it would be great to find a way where we could share that.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was
Can
really
I just say one last thing? Mark Major said
one last thing, thank you.
Okay, Mark Major said to me, the problem we have is that at night time, we are trying to create daytime instead of creating a nightscape. And I suppose what we want to see is a thoughtful nightscape that's environmentally friendly, inclusive, is respectful of the dark, and is for people.
Fantastic. Just muted myself at exactly the wrong moment. Apologies, everybody. I'd like to go to Nick now. One of your aims, of course, as we've said, is to make the city livelier at night. So really interesting to hear how you're using lighting to do this. And also maybe a bit about how the city's lighting strategy has affected visitor experiences and indeed has been affected during the last year as we've all been spending so much more time outside. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Claire. Yes, well, I think I have to make an admission. I mean, we're at the start of a journey. We've packed our bag, we put our boots on, we have the roadmap, but we haven't started going down that roadmap yet. And if anybody wants to see that roadmap, just a quick plug, our lighting strategy is on the City Corporation website, cityoflondon.gov.uk. You'll find it up there. So to say, really, the pandemic has disabled us from being able to really play with the light and see what works and what doesn't. We've seen very, very low footfall in central London, but I think that has really helped us in a way, because there are so many things that are evolving in the whole lighting story, the whole lighting narrative. Not only the technology, of course, but also behaviors, the way people are thinking about light, thinking about culture and light, thinking about sustainability, thinking about safety. And I think perhaps lighting has a couple of roles. One is a supporting function, if you like, to the tourism economy, the nighttime economy. Enabling events and activities, signposting where cultural buildings are, safety obviously is key, and making the cityscape a really attractive place to be, improving accessibility, all of those things that we would want. And I think it also has a starring role. I think we can use light as the program. We can use lighting shows, lighting installations. I mean, acknowledging indeed what Sarah said about, you know, we don't obviously want a great grand spectacle every night, but there are subtle ways in which we can do that, working with artists. And so I say we're at the start of the journey. I think that one of those parts of that evolution has been the pandemic, and what the pandemic has taught us, and what we need to do when we start back using our cities, using central London. And certainly some of the things that come to mind for me are the role that lighting is going to play in instilling confidence in being in a place. And that's from a safety perspective, as much as it is from accessibility, etc. It's also about exciting aspiration to either visit a building, to go into a building. If St. Paul's is well lit, and that's a job we've yet to do, but if St. Paul's is well lit, let's signpost St. Paul's, let's make St. Paul's look great, and let's really excite aspiration. Lighting is a great way for celebration, commemoration, and memorialization as well, and we can use it in those ways. I mean, I think back to 2016, where we used lighting quite a good deal, when we were actually commemorating the 350th anniversary of the Great Fire of London, working with Artichoke, and the work that we did there. And one of those things that I was just saying about evolution as well is also a real focus on diversity as we move forward. And I think we can think of the night as a blank canvas, and really light is our painting palette. I loved recently, just thinking about diversity and inclusion, but and with lights, TfL's work on the green woman at crossings rather than the green man on International Women's Day. I mean, that was a great touch. But I think what we can do with light is if all is dark, there are things we can accentuate. We can create the narrative that we want to tell. We can highlight certain statues and memorials. We can highlight buildings. We can highlight achievements in different ways. to actually to tell a story around the Black history community in the city, around women, around any sort of theme that we wish to take. So I think that's quite an interesting way of working. I think also in sense of the recovery is we also want to support our artists and support our creatives who have really been hard hit by the pandemic. And I think that we can really look to them to actually look at what interventions we can make through light in the public realm at night time. I think certainly what we are going to see is we're going to see working patterns change. We are going to see the way that we use our cities change. And that for the city offers up some very exciting opportunities as well as some challenges. Not least of those is potentially an intensity and density midweek of workers being in the city. Are they going to work longer hours? Are we going to have people going to retail later at night rather than the bar traditionally? Are people going to use the nightscape more? And we really need to play around with that and look at that. And then also look at the role at nighttime as well. The traditional pubs, yes, the pubs, the clubs, and the being out, but what about the streetscape? What happens in that streetscape? What do we do to make people feel engaged, to feel safe, and to bring them in? Because what is more important to us than anything at the moment is really exciting that footfall back into the city. So yeah, I think I would just say finally, of course, the whole sustainability piece. You made reference in the presentation to the savings that can be made. We have a climate action strategy which we launched this year, which obviously reflects our lighting strategy and reflects our principles across all sorts of ambitions that we have at the City Corporation. But part of that is across our estate and across the programs that we run, is to be at a net zero carbon emission by 2027. Now that's a really brave ambition, but we also want to help our partners and our stakeholders in that too. And I think lighting is a key way of doing that. So that's where I'll conclude, if that's okay. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick, and apologies for once again for my terrible lighting. I appear to only have half a face. I promise the rest of it is still there. But yeah, it feels like the lighting I get at the beginning of the migraine, so I do apologise if it's distracting to you. Gabriella, I'd like to come to you last and maybe take a step back from the detail of our own city and ask you to talk about what are the best lit cities in the world and how did they develop that lead and what can we do to be more like them? Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. So after I stepped down as Chief Creative Officer for Mexico City, I had the incredible fortune of starting to work with many cities and had the chance to travel to five continents. So while I was preparing for this talk, I both revisited in my mind many of my favorite cities in terms of lighting, but also one of my favorite little essay books that is called In Praise of Shadow by Tanizaki, a wonderful Japanese author that I'm not sure if any of you have read.
Oh no, I think we've lost Gabriella. So my colleagues here at Centre for London are going to try very hard to get Gabriella back. I think maybe she just had a bit of a technical glitch. Other panelists, I do hope you don't mind if we go straight into Q&A, and then if Gabriella comes back, we'll ask her to complete her talk. Thank you for your flexibility. So the top question we've got so far, and I think a really interesting one, is from Don Slater. How can lighting play a part in relation to diversity and inequality in London? And Don's mentioned relationships between social groups, problems of access and coexistence. I know that I think all of you have already made reference to this in your presentations, but really interested in further reflections. Amy, would you like to go first?
Yeah, first of all, it's great that Don Slater is here. I really admire all of the work that he's done to light London well. And I guess, you know, Don will be familiar with my arguments around this as well, but I think it's worth saying that, you know, London is a 24-hour city, and the only reason that that is possible is through lighting. And without it, our city would grind to a halt. And I'm particularly concerned around the equality experienced for the 1.6 million people that regularly work in London at night, that depend on light to travel safely and confidently to their jobs. It means that our supermarket shelves are stocked. It means our hospitals are able to run. It means the culture and creativity happens. Lighting is absolutely essential, but what is important is that we're using the right kind of light in the right places. And I know that this is a question that's been coming up in the chat around issues around safety, and what is safe, and is it just a perception, or can you actually measure it? And it's very difficult. We know that it's a powerful tool, but is overlooked and misunderstood. So we really have to look at these vital questions that the report poses. What is happening in our city after dark? Who is out and about, and why? And does our lighting help or hinder those people and London's economy? And when we look at who is out and about, for example, at night, that 1.6 million Londoners regularly working at night, I can tell you, a large percentage of those people are people of color, and there is also a large percentage of them that are women. And with those particular lenses put on our lighting at night, then we should be really looking at diversity and inclusion as one of the most fundamental things to consider when we're thinking about lighting. So yeah, thanks, Don, for bringing that up. I think it's of utmost importance.
Thanks, Amy. Really agree with all of that. And I was really pleased that this report talked about children, because I think, we talk about equalities. It's also really important to talk about age, both older people and children. I walk my child back from nursery in the dark for several months of the year, and it's really made me think about the legibility and how on earth do I stop him tripping over a tree root or landing on the neighbour's cat? So Nick or Sarah, would either of you like to come in on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would reiterate what I've said before about I think that I think lighting can work for us in a number of ways. Not only in the sense that we have that blank canvas through dark, and we can paint through light, and we can accentuate and tell a narrative of what's happening in the streetscape, and that narrative may be related to groups that traditionally we exclude. I think that one of the great things about light is we don't have to build a statue that we then have to serve 20 years and clean it. We can put it on one night, we can take it away another. So it gives us that versatility to actually be able to do that. And I think Amy raises some really interesting points. And really, I think that, the city certainly reflects the community that Amy has been talking about, the nurses and doctors working at St. Bart's, the security guards working in offices, the cleaners working in offices. And really, is this an opportunity for us to respond culturally to that audience and to really think about how we can deliver content that stimulates that audience in that way? And then I would say finally is also, that opportunity of using light to as art installation, etc. We have a recognition of women program that we started in 2018 on the centenary of suffrage. A number of other programs as well that we're working on at the moment. But part of that, had the pandemic not have happened, was we had commissioned Hannah Starkey to take some fantastic photos of women at work in the city, working women in the city. And the culmination of that project was to be some very significant projections of those photos on very iconic city buildings. And to do that, obviously the conditions around those buildings in terms of lighting need to be right. We need to switch off lights and we need to put other lights on. So I think that there are many ways, and I think one of the resources that we really need to enable us is not money. Yes, of course, everyone needs money, but what we absolutely need is we need a wealth of imagination. we need to really, really think through about this very exciting, very versatile thing, and about the changing behaviours and how we respond to those post-pandemic. So yes, I think that there's a huge amount of potential there. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to come in, or would you like to have a go at another question?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, because ours is a light art project, one of the things we learned, obviously, was that because it's moving, it's kinetic, but very slowly, and we've used colour on some of them, is that we brought in a new audience for public art, which are people with a range of sight loss. I mean, and there's over 2 million people with a range of sight loss who aren't actually blind. But our artwork has been a way for them to engage in the public realm, which they feel very excluded from most of the time because of the scale of what we've done, the fact that it moves and the fact that we use colour. And then we've also created a soundtrack as well. We've commissioned, especially for the second phase, we've got over 50 new pieces of music. Must talk to you about this, Amy. We've got some wonderful things that you should hear, so that you could create a more sensory experience for that group of people, or any groups of people. I think it's about also, it's just intelligent things. I mean, it's going back to some of the work that Don's done, that I've attended some of those seminars, and the reason why a lot of older people don't go out at night is not fear of being attacked, it's fear of falling. So, it's what you're going back to about your toddler. So if you actually have some lighting, which is about highlighting where the beautiful cobblestones and work is in the City of London and the curbs, that just enables them. So it is, as Nick is saying, it's about an intelligent thinking, going, okay, what are the obstacles to these different groups of people, and to have those conversations, because it's not really that hard once you sort of join all that up. I mean, and then the other group is younger people, who, if they gather at night, are seen as a problem, especially, I mean, I've got a teenage boy, and so, more of the three of those together is called a gang, and that's bad, is, at night, they want to be out, and they want to be in places that they feel safe as well. And it's odd that teenagers actually gather under CCTV cameras, because actually they feel safer that they're being monitored too, because a teenage male is the biggest victim of crime as well in a city. So I think we have to have, honest conversations and listen about what we can do to create those environments that at the moment people feel excluded from.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really interesting responses there. One of the challenges I find with this topic is each one of you has come up with about 6 different things that I would really love to follow up with you. We could have so many webinars. We're trying to get Gabriella back. We're not sure if we're going to get her back before the end of the session, but if we do, I will ask our other contributors to stop talking to give her an opportunity to give the presentation that she's prepared. So I apologise that this is a bit choppy. But to come to another question now from Denise. The presentation at the beginning, Nico's presentation, highlighted the issue of women feeling safe in London, and what role can lighting play in helping with this, especially as more people venture out post-lockdown. I have been out after dark considerably less this year than I usually am, but I very much hope that will change soon. Sarah, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been working on this project so that I've had to be out at 2 o'clock in the morning, on near the riverbanks, saying to Leo, yes, that looks good, while he's sort of working on his laptop somewhere around. And I have not felt safe. And part of that is because there are not a lot of people around. And I think this goes back to something that, with Amy, is there are certain routes that people use at night, partly maybe because of the way that they're lit. And certainly the riverbanks, certainly on the north side, I mean, not on the south side, which I think, is this wonderful route day and night, but certainly on the north bank, it's very underused. And it's partly because you have to move away from the river. It's partly the inconsistencies of the lighting. And that has discouraged, certainly as a woman on your own, or, anyone on their own, frankly, don't want to use it. So I think it's about having more activity, using these routes, which are beautiful, are great routes because you're away from cars, you can look at the river, you've got a lot of fresh air, it's beautiful, you've got the historic environment. So we've created walking maps to encourage people to use these routes. So the more people that do, and the more that we sort out the lighting on those routes, then, the better it will get. But, I've been out there and felt really kind of are vulnerable. I mean, and it's silly things like, you know, going up Waterloo Bridge. I mean, I knew there are moments where you don't know who owns the land, and so the lighting's not maintained very well, and there are dark points. So going up Waterloo Bridge, for example, is a very favourite spot to be mugged, because there's light, dark, and a tight space, so you can't get away from your mugger. But this inconsistency, because there are so many landowners, and when lighting goes off, if you haven't got a sophisticated lighting network, we have something called Active Sight that tells you when a light is about to fail, even before it does. Whereas others use sort of people that go out at night occasionally and check. Then you get these problems. It'd be great if there was some kind of app where you could just report where all of this is as well, because there are spaces which are, can become suddenly feel a lot more dangerous because of lack of maintenance. I think that can be a real issue. Yeah. And I think there's a huge amount of opportunity actually to do more activities at night. Going back to Amy's point, sorry, Amy.
I was just
people working at night.
Sorry for jumping in. I just wanted to agree with those points, and we've found that there is a great desire for more diverse activity at night. We know from our London at Night report, the most comprehensive data study into any city at night in the world, told us that over 65% of Londoners are active at night, and they're doing all sorts of things. Our perception might be that they're all down the pub. In fact, most of them are, either working or studying or, meeting with friends, going to community groups, doing all sorts of things. And this, alongside of our growing nighttime workforce, it creates a really interesting situation and an opportunity. So just before COVID hit, we ran a nighttime enterprise zone pilot scheme in Walthamstow. And it was trying to sort of test these ideas around what could be done at night to activate a high street. And we found that this pilot scheme in Walthamstow boosted footfall by 22%. And when asked during the pilot, residents and businesses said that good, well-planned lighting was fundamental to creating a welcoming street environment at night. And businesses also saw good lighting and public realm designers helping to create a strong nighttime brand for the high street. So, this would also encourage more through traffic by using light to help people navigate their way through a town center. And there were all sorts of really interesting recommendations that came out of this as a result of us doing this trial. So, similar to, what everyone on this panel has said, particularly Nick saying, there are things lighting can be temporary, you can try things out. It's important to run pilots, see what the reaction is, engage with the community. And we just might find that sweet spot that gives us everything that we need. And I agree that the City of London is really leading the way with this.
Thanks, Amy. Nick, from a local authority perspective, I wonder if you'd like to come in, or you may feel that it's been very well covered already.
Well, I think it's been well covered, and I take on board a lot of the points that have been made on the chat, and obviously covered by Amy and Sarah. And I can't represent the concerns of that particular gender, obviously, but certainly I think that one is a lighting strategy. Developing a lighting strategy is a way of consulting with the community and really understanding what those concerns are and thinking those through. And thinking what the solutions are. I said to you, Claire, at the beginning, I'm no technical wizard, so please don't ask me any technical questions. But Ian Hughes, who's on that side at the City Corporation and dealing with this, is certainly what I understand from the lighting strategy is, with the lighting that we are installing, we are able to provide the right levels for CCTV to actually work correctly. We are able to engage a collective group of lights to actually up that lighting in an area where there might be an incident, or indeed remove that lighting in the area where there might be an incident, depending on what that incident is. And so I think that what lighting does is its versatility enables us to almost have an immediate response on street, that when we actually see concerns or issues, as well as, you know, obviously the law enforcement that may then follow. I'm afraid I can't really go into the technical details of that because I don't know. But I think it helps arm, I think.
Thanks so much, Nick. In fact, thank you, everybody. I'm afraid we're out of time and we haven't got Gabriella back. So apologies, because we were very much looking forward to her contribution. And we will share information with attendees about Gabriella's work so you can learn more about it if you're interested. I think all that remains for me to say is thank you so much to our audience today for making the time for this. There's been really interesting discussion on the chat, which I have just barely been keeping on top of. So thank you for that, and thank you for your questions as well. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all. Thank you very much to our wonderful panelists, including Gabriella, who did lots of work for this and isn't here, to my colleagues and to our funders and sponsors for this project. As you know, Centre for London put on lots of events. We'll be putting on a bit fewer over the next few months as we gear up to the mayoral election, but then there'll be many more again post-election. So we look forward to seeing you all at those events. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.